Members, let's continue. Okay, we have taken a 3-minute break, and now this agenda item is proposed establishment of a maritime body for promoting the development of maritime industry in Hong Kong. Chairman, we are reporting to members this time about a consultancy report. And consultancy study was done to set up a new maritime body. The government has always worked to promote Hong Kong as an international maritime center, IMC. In 2014, the Hong Kong Maritime Industry Council published a consultancy report on the maritime industry, and we have come to the conclusion that a new maritime body should be set up. So in the middle of 2014, we have asked a consultant to conduct a business case study to look into different details concerning the new maritime body. For example, its scope of work and its operation mode, etc. So for the business case study consultant, it has talked to the relevant stakeholders. For example, the Hong Kong Maritime Industry Council and different parties, as well as practitioners in the industry. As for the details of the study, you can see in the paper. The industry is particularly concerned about whether this new body will promote the long-term development of the sector. So in order to ensure that the body will be functional and influential, the new body would have to be a high-level steering body with the leadership of policy secretary, so that the government can also provide support for the development of the sector. And also there will be functional committees under the body, and sector members will be invited to join such committees. So the new body will not be a statutory body, but the sector hopes that in the long run the government will work in this direction. The government adopts an open attitude towards this. It is hoped that after the new body is set up and after it has been operating for some time, it will look at the actual situation, and then they will also look at the financial arrangements and whether there will be sustainable development. And after that, the government will decide as to whether this body will be a statutory one. Our consultants will take you through a PowerPoint presentation. Thank you. Now, to build a body to promote the shipping industry in Hong Kong and to build Hong Kong as an IMC, we think there are 4 things that have to be done. First, policy research. So when the government formulates its policy, it can be underpinned by researchers and advisors. And also marketing external relations are very important. We also need to train more talents, and also a one-stop communication window between the local mainland and international maritime communities should be set up. So how can we achieve all these? While we carried out a study, we have talked to the sector. We have heard a lot of precious views from them. We know what they are thinking, and I would like to share with you. Well, most of them think that for this new body, it should be set up as soon as possible. And it should be influential when it comes to the government's policy formulation. It would create opportunities for the sector, and it should also assist Hong Kong in terms of competition. And also, it should make use of the existing networks and talents. Well, the government's support is essential. And we also understand that the sector hopes that a statutory body should be set up in the long run. We have heard these views. We have looked at international practices, and then we have put together some initial proposals. As for these initial proposals, they covers the They cover the following. First of all, the existing resources must be used in a better manner. And also, when we looked at the consultancy report, when it comes to the development of ports and shipping, they can co-create synergy. So when it comes to formulating policies, we have to consider the interests of these two industries. We believe that in terms of policy, the Transport and Housing Bureau should spearhead the organization. And for cooperation, we should step up our cooperation with the Hong Kong Trade Development Council and Invest Hong Kong. As for the THB and the Maritime Department, it can help in terms of manpower development and policy study. Now, please look at these proposed institutional model. There are 3 functional committees under the new proposed body, and there are some supporting bodies. For example, Transport and Housing Bureau, Maritime Department, Invest Hong Kong Trade Development Council. So for this new body, the Secretary for Transport and Housing will be the head, and members will include people from the academia, from the industry, etc. So by doing so, they can spearhead the policies, and also the views can be heard. This will be a high-level steering committee. It would set policies for Hong Kong's future maritime development. And under it, there will be 3 committees: Manpower Committee, Marketing Committee, Maritime and Port Development Committee, and they will all be chaired by members of industry. Because by doing so, we can ensure that government policies are supported by the industry. As for the Manpower Committee, it would have to understand Hong Kong's maritime and port situations, and it will formulate policies to train people. And the Maritime and Aviation Training Fund will also be involved. We also want to attract new talents to come to join the business, and also to attract foreign investors. As for Marketing Committee, it will be conducting studies so as to allow the industry and the government to know more about the actual situation, and to come up with new ideas. THB and the relevant government departments are now already cooperating closely with the sector. But we want to emphasize that the involvement of the sector is very important. So we hope that for after setting up this body, there will be more engagement of the sector, and also the government's formulation of policy will be more evidence-based. And for a body that's going to be set up, it will involve a lot of people from the sector. It also will have executive powers. So we think that people will attach great importance to this body in the future. As for implementation, we have to look at the available resources, but we think it will be done fast. We do not rule out the possibility of turning the body into a statutory one. So we will have to look at the actual situation and see if we can put together satisfactory financial arrangements, and then we will consider whether the body will become a statutory one in the future. Okay, members. Yu Si-wing. Thank you, Chairman. Now, to set up a professional body for a sector so as to help the government in policy formulation, I think this is a good idea, and I support it. But it is just an advisory body or a steering committee. So how authoritative will it be? How influential will it be? Although the secretary will be the chairman, but the secretary has his hands full. So how much can he do? And we really need professional people to do it. I agree that a maritime body should be set up, and you can take reference from a number of public bodies. For example, the Travel Industry Council. It also has a public function. So it's authorized under the law to put together policies, and it's more authoritative. You can see that for the TIC, it has been operating for decades, and lately they have set up a travel authority, and also for the insurance industry, they are doing the same thing, because after operating for a number of years, they think that they should have a stronger body to regulate the industry. So would the government consider this? That is, for this new maritime body, should it be given more powers? For example, accreditation.
For example, you have manpower and training. If it carries the function of accreditation, then for those wishing to join the sector or those who want to enhance a sector, the body can provide a more professional platform, such that through this function, the sector can be developed. And secondly, I believe that for the maritime industry, they face a lot of stakeholders, the government, other organizations, and the public, and they need to disseminate a message to the public. If this body has the function as a mediator, then it will be more suitable for the body to disseminate message to the public, so that all issues can be addressed before the government implements a policy or make adjustments to a policy. This is better than the government working on its own. So this is for the government to consider. There should be, the new body should be given some functions, and legislation may be necessary. I reckon the council will support it. So it will be better than say a toothless tiger. Well, not so much as toothless, but at least we can give them some teeth. Secretary. Well, as mentioned in my opening remarks, or as per the outcome of the consultancy study, we believe that first of all, we're proposing a new body. This is not just an advisory body. This new maritime body, for the two existing bodies, the MIC and the Port Development Council, I am the chairman, and we believe that there should be new maritime body that can go beyond status of being an advisory body. Because this is not a statutory body, for the time being, no legislation is necessary. We consider in setting up a new maritime body whether it must be a statutory body. Of course, we understand the sector's views that a statutory body should be set up. That is why the new maritime body will be commissioned and operate for some time before we review whether it should be converted into a statutory body. This approach is also recognized by the sector. I chair 3 advisory bodies, Port Development Council, the MIC, and the other council, and they acknowledge this direction. As for accreditation and mediation, as mentioned by the honourable member, for disputes arising between organizations, we already have a mediation and arbitration mechanism. As for maritime and aviation courses, we have organized these courses before, and the Marine Department now fulfills the function of recognizing some of the qualifications. Mr. Frankie Yik. Now, Secretary, you may know that the sector have been urging the government to set up a maritime and port council for 20 years so that Hong Kong can develop towards an international maritime center. And there is unanimous view from the sector that a statutory body be set up by the government. Of course, we understand legislation is necessary and time is necessary. So we regard this as an interim proposal which we reluctantly accept. Yet we acknowledge that this is a start, and that study has been commissioned to look into the long-term development of the industry. We hope that funding approval can be given from the Finance Committee for the body to start this work. Now, in terms of the business case study of the consultant, the findings are that the functions can all be performed administratively so that a statutory body is not needed. I don't agree, because it all hinges on the scope of work. Now it carries a very narrow scope. We should look at the counterpart in Singapore, the Maritime and Port Authority. We should set up something similar to that for the long-term development of the industry, because maritime and trade in Hong Kong, maritime and port industries contribute 2.5% of the total employment and $24 billion of Hong Kong's GDP. So you should not relax your effort. It should be, a statutory body should be set up ultimately. Now, the ultimate goal is to set up a statutory body. I understand that this is the wish of the sector, and the government is open-minded about this proposal. Of course, if this is a statutory body, we need to consider through legislation empowering the body to carry out certain functions. For Singapore's Maritime and Port Authority, it is an executive body. In fact, some of the functions of the Singapore's authority are carried out by government departments, such as the Marine Department in Hong Kong. So in the future, we need to consider comprehensively the whole structure. But again, the industry's view is that we should give a start and set up a new body. And in the future, if we head for a statutory body, we can then consider in greater detail the functions of a statutory body. Mr. Charles Mok. Thank you, Chairman. Well, first of all, I think it's really good for Ms. Joey Lam to have come to the meeting under the Transport and Housing Bureau. We have been consulting you for a number of IT-related matters, for the one-stop window and other transportation services. I hope that the Bureau can keep up with the times and use more advanced technologies. Well, for the new body, in terms of its functions, we discussed with the Secretary a number of times on the idea of one-stop service, because from the maritime and logistics sector and the IT sector, I gathered that the view is that we're lagging behind other major cities and ports. So perhaps Mr. Ng or Secretary can respond to my question about this one-stop window for communication. Have you compared with other jurisdictions or have you drawn on overseas experience? Well, let's say if there is a portal or a website for accessing information, I don't think this is the general wish. We should not stay at that level. As for what information should be included, it won't be sufficient if you only have information on previous transactions. What about third-party logistics companies and ports? Would it be possible for you to require their participation? Is it possible? Because some organizations have expressed that they're not interested in taking part in this. So it seems that you are unable to do anything in this regard. So can you give me some preliminary idea? Now, single window. We have a lot of them in the business and commerce sectors and maritime logistics sector, and the government is also concerned about the promotion of single windows. As for the division of work, well, it's actually under the remit of the Commercial and Economic Development Bureau. It doesn't just affect the logistics sector. It affects the whole business and commercial sector. And I think a more comprehensive plan will be floated in due course. Well, Mr. Ng, do you have anything to add? Of course, we understand you need interdepartmental effort. Well, maybe we're not. Maybe this is not the main subject of today's discussion. I don't know which policy bureau is responsible. Maybe this should be resolved later. But setting that aside, perhaps you can't give us the details at this stage. But at least in terms of its functions, comparing to other overseas models, because you talked about the major functions in your study report. Now, when I talk to people about the single window, their definition of single window may be different from the government's. So do you have some idea? Now, I think the focus is that through the single window, the industry would be given information on the development of maritime and port development. While the industry may be reluctant in giving us this information for dissemination, and there are different proposals. For example, but on a subscription basis, members will be able to receive information to help their business, so as to attract more participants to the single window service. Now, we haven't finalized the details. This will be our work at the next stage. But the important thing is for industry users to give information as well as user service. The information will be used to develop useful messages to the industry. Now, in short, Chairman, well, if single window is adopted for the logistics sector, or maritime sector, or transportation sector, for example, in giving licenses to practitioners, the government should require that the data be made available to the public. I think Ms. Lam is very familiar with this. For major companies in the transport sector, for those monopolizing the market or those leaders in the market, they should make their information public. They should not keep the information to themselves. Next, Dr. Kenneth Leung. Well, about this new body, I think the structure is similar to the Financial Development Council set up 3 years ago. There are committees like manpower, marketing, etc. So in recent years, I see that the government has been really fond of creating these kind of bodies, something between an advisory body and a statutory body. So a number of questions. First, in terms of its functions or powers, is it that by administrative arrangements the Transport and Housing Bureau delegate powers to the new body? And second question, about the budget for this new body, does it come from the annual envelope? Now, this new body is not the same in nature as the MIC or the PDC. It's a higher level, but it's not a statutory body, and is empowered to carry out certain functions, can make decisions, for example, on manpower and training and market development. As a new body, it can decide how to take its work ahead, and it will be given new resources through the government under the Transport and Housing Bureau. So we will strive for resources with the Financial Secretary. In fact, it's similar to a district council. The district council is advisory in nature. Each year, allocation will be given to district councils, and annually, the financial controller of the government allocates funding to district councils. But operationally, the body can decide how to do its work.
So some power will be given to this new maritime body. I have heard our members' views, and also I have heard from the industry. They hope that in the long run this can be a statutory body. And Chairman, if you remember, more than a year ago, I did express a view. That is, I think the DHB should change, because you should look at our major direction. Now we want to develop the maritime and aviation industries, and this is the long-term positioning of Hong Kong in the 21st century. We want to be an international maritime and aviation center. This is a huge project. So Professor Anthony Chung, as the Secretary for Transport and Housing, I think you have too heavy a burden on your shoulders. I would like to make a suggestion to the government. I hope that for the Transport and Housing Bureau, it should be divided up, and our Transport Bureau should become an independent one. Now, because the Secretary has too much work. Now, the third runway, the Hong Kong-Zhuhai-Macau bridge, and a bridge being banked by a barge, lead-tainted water, all these are your responsibilities. So if we are going to focus on the development of aviation and maritime industries, then I hope that we can have a dedicated bureau, that is Transport Bureau, and under the Transport Bureau there can be a statutory maritime body. This is a long-term solution for the problem. Secretary, as I said just now, yes, we understand what the sector wants to see. They hope that eventually a statutory body can be set up. But of course, when it comes to the functions of the statutory body, we still have to finalize the details. So at the moment, we are setting up an administrative body. And also, the member talked about the splitting of duties of the THB. That is, there should be a dedicated transport bureau. Yes, now we really have a huge portfolio, but I don't think this reform can be done within this term of government. Mr. Chairman, in principle, we support the setting up of a new maritime body for the further development of the maritime industry in Hong Kong. And after hearing the presentation, I agree that the progress should be step by step. We don't have to set up a statutory body right away. So I think at the moment we should merge the related bodies first, for example, the MIC and the PDC, and also representatives of the industry should be invited to join the new body. So we will have a major integration, and afterwards we will develop step by step. I think this is reasonable and acceptable. Any other views, members? Okay, Secretary and your team, thanks for coming. Well, we do not need to vote on this item, so let's move on. Chairman, good morning. First of all, I would like to welcome you all to the panel meeting. And we will be talking about the Competition Commission's preparation for full commencement of the competition ordinance. Ms. Anna, please. Thank you, Chairman. Good morning. Today, I would like to talk to you about our preparation before the full commencement of the ordinance. Now we have several colleagues here. Well, we have Ms. Rose Webb. She will be talking about our preparatory work, and we have Mr. Russell Putt, who will be talking about promotion and education. And also we have representatives from the Office of the Communications Authority. We have Ms. Elaine Hui and Ms. Helen Lai. They will be talking about communications and answer questions. In the past 1.5 years, we have given you relevant messages. Well, we have members from OFCA. How about members from Mr. Grexo's team? Well, the Competition Commission operates independently. Well, the Tourism Commission also operates independently, but Mr. Grexo also attended. Well, okay, it's up to you. There are many independent commissions, but there is a responsible bureau. But when we ask you questions, we may put questions to the government. And even when the Tourism Commission comes here, Mr. Grexo will come here. You're under Mr. Grexo, right? The Competition Commission, yes, is under Mr. Grexo. But there's nobody from the Bureau. Okay, I hope that we don't have any questions for the Bureau. Well, I think we have limited time, so I'll just briefly tell you what we have done in the past 1.5 years. We have talked to the business sector and we have given them a very clear message. That is, they have to assess their risk, they have to be prepared. And if there is a need before the full commencement, they have to make changes to their conduct and practices. So we have reminded them to make changes so that they can comply with the law. Some applicants have now applied for exemptions. Now, in order to streamline future procedures and to handle things more swiftly, at this moment, we are now having an initial discussion with them. We hope that things can be done more efficiently. So after the full commencement, we will follow the relevant procedures and we will handle things one by one. And at the same time, because we have this kind of applications, we have said that when they apply for exemptions, we will suspend prosecution. In 6 months' time, we will conduct a review. So for many companies and industries, they have talked to us during this period. They have considered relevant measures and they have started to change their practices and conducts. As of last week, we have received about 400 inquiries and complaints. That is before the full commencement. Some of them are about cartel and some of them about price controlling or price manipulation. So we'll handle these inquiries and complaints as fast as possible. And we have also conducted some market researches, but they are not directly related to the full commencement, and we have already started to do that. So after the full commencement, of course, we want to promote the new law, and also we want to ensure that we have a fair playing field. At the same time, there should be competition. Now I will invite Ms. Rose Webb to take us through the rest.
Just to update the panel on some of the publications the Commission has published since the last appearance at this meeting. At the last time, we discussed the draft guidelines that the Commission had put out for consultation. We took account of the comments made by LegCo members at that meeting and also other responses we had received and published the final guidelines on 27th of July. They're available on our website and also the website of the Communications Authority in both Chinese and English. Following the consultation with panel members at the last meeting about the MOU between the Competition Commission and the Communications Authority, both authorities have finalised the drafting of that MOU, and it will be signed soon after the ordinance comes into full effect. We've also published guidance for small business on how to assess turnover from the exclusions from the Competition Ordinance conduct rules, and we've published guidance on how the competition fees regulation will be administered. Last week, we published our enforcement policy, which outlines how the Commission will prioritise the use of its resources to investigate contraventions. And on the same day, the cartel leniency policy was finalised following public consultation on a draft document. And all of these publications are also available in both English and Chinese on the Commission's website. The Commission continues to reach out to the business community through its publications and other methods, and I'll pass to my colleague, Mr. Buck, to give more detail on these initiatives.
Please. Yeah.
Thank you. In the past few months, the Competition Commission has been actively engaged the public and the industry so as to prepare for the full commencement of the competition ordinance. We have held over 180 briefings and talks. We have contacted major chambers and representatives of different trade associations, etc. And also for SMEs, the public and trade associations, we've held 9 seminars and the response has been very good. As for education, ever since April this year, we have published different guidelines. For example, for SMEs, we hope that we can encourage the trade associations and the and different companies to review their own practice and conduct so that they can come up with the compliance policies, and we hope that they would heed the rules after the ordinance comes into full operation. From September to November, on Hong Kong Island, Kowloon, and New Territories, and 7 locations, we have staged roving exhibitions, and we also have some interactive games so that the visitors will find it more easy to understand the new rules. And also in July this year, we put together a 10-episode 1-minute drama series. It was presented in a light-hearted manner, and it has attracted a lot of audience. We hope that through such publicities, the public would be able to understand the competition ordinance more. So before and after the full commencement, we will continue to conduct activities. For example, the TDC will be holding an SME Expo in December, so we will be joining them so that we can do more publicity. And we also come up with a new API, which will be broadcast on TVs and radios in the near future. We will also be seeking the help of different media. The Competition Commission will continue to communicate with different stakeholders. We hope that through publicity, education, and education, the public can understand more about the competition ordinance. And we also want to help the business sector to be more prepared for the full commencement of the competition ordinance.
So, I'll see if there are any questions from members. Mr. Dennis Kwok, Mr. Charles Mock, Dr. Kenneth Leung, Frankie Yik, Yu Xin Wing, and Jeffrey Lam. 5 minutes each. Please ask questions directly, and I hope that the Commission will be able to answer directly. 5 minutes, Mr. Dennis Kwok. Thank you, Chairman. First of all, I thank the Competition Commission for their hard work in the past years for the establishment of the Competition Commission. Now, I'm concerned about this. In para 16 and 17 of the paper, it talks about the enforcement policy, but there are no details on cases that will have to be taken to court after thorough investigation, for example, involving investigation into oil companies or international corporations. They have abundant resources, and they have a lot of resources to spend if the cases are taken to court. I want to know if the Commission has the means to cope with these major litigation cases, and what will happen if there aren't sufficient resources. And I mentioned previously that there should be a litigation fund or trust. Otherwise, the major corporations would know that you don't have the resources to tackle them in litigation. I'd like to reply from the Commission. Thank you for the question. First of all, our advantage is that we have engaged different professionals to tackle the cases together, and we can further outsource the investigation cases to other professionals. Now, we're talking about looking into these cases, but in terms of actual investigation or enforcement, it must be done by the Commission, of course. In terms of resources and financial resources and manpower resources in particular, in terms of our establishment, we have a size of 50 at the moment. And the upper half of the establishment are professionals, and they are in charge of investigation. As for the financial aspect, Now, every year we're not given annual allocation from the government specifically for litigation purposes. Now, I myself am negotiating with the government, and before we have a reply from the government, the government has allocated surplus fundings to the Commission. In the future, if studies are to be conducted, we have this reserve available. However, at present, I am also concerned about the huge litigation costs, and the cases may be protracted to a year or more than a year, and there should be an appeal fund. Well, Chairman, this is not the first time we raised a concern. May I ask the panel to write to the administration what their response is on this issue? That's why I said it's unreasonable not to have any government official or the policy secretary here. Of course, we can write to them. But of course, we don't want huge allocations to be given for the most expensive counsel to be engaged in litigation. But we have no government official here. Now, well, litigation costs aside, if they lose in a case, they may need to pay damages, which may again be substantial. So how, in that event, is the Competition Commission going to pay damages? I think next time we should invite Mr. Greg So or somebody from the Bureau to come. Thank you, Chairman. Right, I have answered the question for you. Next, Mr. Charles Mock. I have a question on the leniency policy. According to newspaper reports, the industry notes that the Commission has there are two executive bodies, the Competition Commission and Communications Authority. It seems that there are two approaches to this leniency policy. The Commission, on the one hand, limits the application of the policy to cartel conduct. Right, it's cartel conduct. On the other hand, as far as the Communications Authority is concerned, they take a broader view, and they believe that each case should be looked into individually if they're related to this area. So I have a question for the CA. Can you explain to me what is the purpose of applying the policy on the case-by-case basis? And as for the Competition Commission, you're only tackling cartel conduct. And I think many would think that it is a departure from Section 80 of the ordinance, as Section 80 doesn't impose this limitation. So can you explain the difference? And why is it different from the original intent of Section 80? Now, Chairman, I see this as a problem because in the future, we cannot rule out the possibility that there may be cases involving the two enforcement authorities, and there may be a gray area. For example, there may be a business involving a telecommunication service as well as other hardware or other kind of services that may be related. If the two bodies have different approaches, as an informant, well, of course, if I am complaining against a conduct which is not cartel conduct, then if I lodge a complaint with the Competition Commission, then I wouldn't be given the lenient treatment. And of course, I would think that this is unfair. And I would then judicially challenge file a judicial review with the Commission. I would want the Communications Authority to deal with my case instead, or alternatively, the informant will be deterred from even making a complaint at all. Who would take the question? Well, if necessary, I can answer your question, Chairman. We have the policy paper. Thank you for raising the question. First of all, I'd like to explain that in the paper related to the leniency policy, it stipulates that there are other circumstances in which we will still preserve the power to, or the discretionary power. Now, we give this clear policy undertaking for the first person to approach us because for competition authorities around the world, they know very well that without an informant, we can't tackle cartel conduct. This is very clear. And secondly, for cartel conduct around the world, the competition authorities will not give lenient treatment to everybody in the cartel. So we need to give an incentive for the first person to step out. So for the first marker that meets our criteria, we will make a leniency agreement with that person. That is the approach of the Competition Commission. The Commission also issued an enforcement policy. It's issued along with the lenient policy paper because we have collaborations with the other authority, and under such circumstances, we need to consider how to implement remedial action more effectively, which is also cost effective. This is a paper that explains the importance and the position of the Competition Commission. Chairman, well, can I ask the Commission whether the two bodies share the same approach, because according to media reports, they take different approaches. Now, can you wait for another round, because you seem to have spent too much time on one question, so wait for your next round. Third member, ask a short question if you want them to give a longer answer. Now, of course, when they speak, I don't mind if you interject any time to clarify matters. Dr. Kenneth Leung. 5 minutes. Now, I'd like to pick up on the point of making leniency agreement with the first marker in the cartel conduct. I understand that leniency policy means a leniency agreement as far as a policy concerned. It's not a legal immunity as such. Secondly, I haven't read the provisions in great detail. All the offenses targeting companies or individuals in the competition ordinance. And for the whistleblower, now you have this leniency policy. Will a natural person benefit? Let's say if an employee knows that the company is engaging in cartel conduct with another company, and then the employee acts as the informant, and then 2 months later the company is prosecuted for breaching the ordinance, and the matter is exposed, and then the employee is sacked. I want to know how broad the scope of this policy is.
The policy that we published applies to undertakings involved in cartel conduct, so it was specifically limited in this particular policy to circumstances where a undertaking seeks leniency. However, we outline in the policy two things. One, that if an undertaking seeks leniency, its employees and officers will also get the benefit of the immunity arrangement. And secondly, we also make it clear that other parties can approach the Commission to sort of whistleblow or tell us about conduct, and that we would take action to preserve their confidentiality and proceed with their complaints. We don't have a specific power to protect them against action by their company, but we would certainly do everything we could to keep the fact that they had made a complaint to us confidential, and that applies to complaints in general.
So, no specific policy in this regard. But as an officer or as a director in the competition ordinance, there is an exemption, whereas for an employee, if it is in breach of the employment ordinance, then giving you all the information, etc., I don't think they have the protection. And I think I need to do something to protect them. And secondly, I'd like to thank Mr. Timothy Lear, your colleague, for holding seminars for the industry to explain the competition ordinance. There is a 30-second short video with practical day-to-day examples, bargaining in markets, for example. It's very useful. However, as far as the public is concerned, I still have this ambiguity as far as the Competition Commission is concerned. For example, how to lodge a complaint, what is your modus operandi. Not even the business practitioners know how to make a complaint. And for anti-competitive conduct, yes, we learned that from the example. As to the avenue available for complaint, I think it's not clear enough. The views of employers and employees, well, go think about that. We have an enforcement policy, and there is room for us to exercise discretion. But I note members' views. You asked about our workflow. Perhaps I can answer briefly that on the website we have information on how to lodge a complaint, the hotline, etc. All the information is on the website. And we have information explaining the policy, and we will enhance the information. We so far have received about 400 complaints and inquiries. We hope to be more effective, of course. Maybe internally we can see if we can enhance the procedures.
So will you set up a community relations department like that of the ICAC, so that the public can ask questions and lodge complaints? Well, we now do have channels for inquiries and complaints. Mr. Butler is responsible for that. As for community relations, yes, we have considered that. However, we have to think about our resources, so we have to be careful. Ranky Ik. Thank you, Chairman. Well, for the last item, we were talking about Hong Kong's maritime and logistics industries. They account for 25% of Hong Kong's GDP, and it employed over 750,000 people. We have been talking about Liners Association, and they are very concerned about block exemption. The Commission previously issued a statement unlikely to initiate enforcement action, and the chairman said just now that you would have a suspension now for the moment. So it seems to me that it is not something very concrete, and the Mainland Association hope that the Commission can make it clearer. That is, if they are working, well, if they are applying for a block exemption, so during this period you will definitely not enforce the law, because they want to have a more definite answer from you. And also, Ms. Anna Wu, previously I sent you a letter. You know, if they make an application and you reject the application, does it mean that you will enforce the law immediately? Because for this kind of liners, it will they will have to take a very long time before an arrangement can be made. So would you consider a grace period? That is, when you consider a waiver, if you do not approve the application, will you give them a grace period so that they can ratify? And before that, they would not be regarded as having contravened the law. So I hope that they can really give them a grace period because they really need time for deployment. So what does the Commission think? I will answer first, and I will ask Ms. Rose Webb to help later. Well, the law itself does not allow us to give up enforcement or to give a grace period, so we cannot do that. But when we look at international practice, we have thought twice, and also this is a new law. So we hope that we can reassure the applicants. So we are exercising our discretion and suspend the enforcement for a moment, but we have to enforce the law. And that's why we can only do this, because basically we will have to enforce the law. As for the order, we have to think about that, and in 6 months' time we will conduct a review. But for individual cases and for individual industry, I don't think I should answer those questions.
Thank you. As the member has mentioned, we've issued a press release about the arrangements in the interim period while we're considering a block exemption. We've also been having some communication and correspondence with the Liner Shipping Association. I'm in a slightly awkward position because they have urged us extremely strongly to keep that confidential, and I would rather not say something about the specific case except to acknowledge that we can see the issue, that if people need some time to get themselves into compliance, that can't be done overnight, and we've been having discussions with them about the mechanism. So we're aware of needing to have some transitional arrangements once the law comes into effect.
Okay, thank you.
Chairman, yes, I understand what they mean. Yes, Ms. Wu is constrained by the law, and I agree with Mr. James Tan. The government should send representatives to these meetings. If there are problems with the law, I think we should amend the law. I'm not asking the Commission to contravene the law. Now, you just need to give time to the liner so that they can ratify, but they really need time. So you can't say that I reject your application and in 3 weeks' time I will enforce the law. And then all the aligners will not come to Hong Kong. It will be a huge issue for our city. Well, in the course of our discussions, we have to follow our procedures stringently. But again, in the course of our discussions, all these problems would emerge. So we would discuss these problems, and we would try our best to solve these problems. At this stage, we cannot discuss these details with you here. Mr. Yu Swing, thank you, Chairman. As for the competition ordinance, one of its goals is to avoid monopolization, and we also want to protect consumers. Our travel industry would also attach importance to that. We have already done away with our suggestions on tips, but now we have the problem of zero fee organized tours, and it has affected Hong Kong's reputation. Mr. Greg So has put forward 6 measures to tackle this issue. One of it is for Hong Kong's hotels and restaurants, minimum price would be set, and it would have to achieve 2 goals. First, to avoid monopolization. Now, because for these organized tours, actually these agencies are buying heads of tourists from the mainland. So big agencies have the capability to do that, but smaller agencies cannot do that. So that's a kind of monopolization. Also, we want to protect the consumers because these tourists are coming to Hong Kong at a very low cost. So when they come to Hong Kong, they are forced into shopping and they are subject to some misconduct. So they're very unhappy and consumers are not protected. So if that is the case, well, actually, this is put forward by the relevant policy bureau. So can we set a price for the hotels and restaurants so that we can achieve these two goals? Well, if I cannot answer the questions in full, maybe Ms. Webb and Mr. Butt can help me. Now, in the law, a lot of people do not need to come to us for application. Now, if they can do something that can benefit the consumers and if they can enhance the market's efficiency, then if they don't make an application, they can still enjoy an exemption. But of course, this are special circumstances. This is the major framework. As to how the policy is made and how the industries work, well, for the tourism industry, I think they are making a lot of changes already. I would like to thank the tourism industry because they have already started to reform. Now, if the policy bureau wants our views, we are happy to do that because that is one of our functions too. But I don't want to say whether we can do it or not here.
Yes, I think this is a situation where some information sharing about prices and may well enhance consumer protection and efficiency, and so there may be some opportunity to work out how the arrangement can work without infringing the competition ordinance, and we'd certainly be very happy to speak with either the travel industry or the policy department about how that can be done in a way that minimises the risk under the ordinance.
Yes, I understand that there is a sort of flexibility and things can be improved. As for Ms. Webb's answer, under certain circumstances, if information can be provided to the consumers, then there won't be any violation of the law. Well, we are willing to talk to the government and to the stakeholders about this. I hope the Tourism Industry Council can talk to you so that you can come up with a direction. Because we are very concerned about the cartel conduct. So if we reach a consensus on the price, we hope that there can be a certain flexibility so that we won't be contravening the law. We welcome discussions. But the most important point is about providing more information to consumers. Jeffrey Lam? Well, there will be a full commencement of the competition ordinance. As for the General Chamber of Commerce, we are very concerned about the ordinance. We have talked to the chairperson and we have talked to the stakeholders. In particular, about the leniency policy, we have some views. According to the paper, it is said that only undertakings can apply for leniency arrangements. But how about individuals? If the company he represents hasn't signed a leniency agreement with the Commission, then how can the whistleblower be protected? And is there a difference between the penalty imposed on an individual and on an undertaking? Now, the ordinance hopes to stop anti-competitive conduct, so it's not targeting individuals. So can the Commission clarify? Would individuals' conducts be penalized? The General Chamber of Commerce has stated all these views in its letter of position. Now you're implementing the leniency policy. We think it is too early because the competition ordinance is a new piece of legislation and it will have a major impact on the markets and SMEs, and it is something new. It may change the business culture. As for the leniency policy, it encourages companies and people to be whistleblowers or even to betray their business partners. In Chinese culture, this is not something that we encourage. This is something that you want to promote. That is, you want to encourage people to be whistleblowers. Now, if courts and tribunals are to set standards, and if there are no official guidelines, then it's very difficult for undertakings and individuals to decide whether they should blow the whistle. So I hope that more time can be given so that the business sector can be more prepared.
Anna, Chairman. Now, on the cartel, we have a leniency policy. Well, this is a policy issue. This is also adopted by organizations worldwide, because without informants, we won't be able to get hold of any evidence. This is the same as other enforcement agencies. Now, as far as the companies are concerned, they need to take preventive measures. They need to assess risks. We have been discussing these issues for the past 18 months. It is impossible for us not to enforce the law at all. I understand that this is the leniency policy is unpopular among the business sector because somebody will be penalized, but we cannot treat everybody leniently. So to answer you clearly, that definitely we're going to enforce the law. Well, as for the leniency policy, we are being lenient to some parties so that there is room for business entities to consider that. Now, as for whether it should be limited to undertakings, well, when we consider a leniency agreement, we will also consider the employees in that undertaking and see if employees should also enjoy the same leniency treatment. And thirdly, for informants, we have the responsibility to keep the information confidential so as not to disclose the identity of informants. Fourthly, this is in parallel with the enforcement policy. As far as enforcement policy is concerned, we have the discretion to exempt certain liabilities. Well, this is also according to the enforcement policy issued. As for the responsibility of individual employees, of course, under different circumstances, they may be responsible. As for the officer or director of a company, we may ask for the disqualification order be issued by the court so that the person will be barred from becoming a director of a company in 5 years' time. We have incorporated this in the ordinance. We try to come up with a more innovative way to carry out our work. Well, second round, 3 minutes, Mr. Charles Mock. Well, for the second round, Mr. Chair, you just came in. You raised your hand later than Mr. Mock. So we have Mr. Charles Mock, Mr. Paul Chair, and Mr. Jeffrey Lam. Chairman, what time is the meeting going to be adjourned? Well, it's not relevant. If you just go ahead with the second round, if you want to pursue other questions, you wait for your third round. You should ask a more focused question because you made a number of points just now. I just want more time to set out the background. So a question for the Communications Authority. Is the approach the same or different? Communications Authority? On leniency policy, the OFCA's position is this. When the competition ordinance was undergoing consultation, we also consulted the sector whether there should be a separate lenient policy or whether we should work with the Competition Commission. We received the views from the sector, and having taken into account the competition clause applicable to the telecommunications and broadcasting sector, we decide not to implement a specific lenient policy when the ordinance comes into effect. But it doesn't mean that we won't give a leniency agreement a consideration. On a case-by-case basis and with the discretionary power given under the law, we may give leniency agreement on a case-by-case basis. Now, Mr. Mok asked whether the sector would be unsure which body to approach. Well, the OFCA and the Commission has a concurrent jurisdiction in terms of the broadcasting and telecommunication sector. And in the MOU, we have agreed on the division of work. Now, for anti-competitive conduct of licensees in the broadcasting and telecommunication sector under the MOU, generally, this will be dealt with by the OFCA. So in considering leniency policy, our approach would be one based on the MOU. Now, if the business partially falls in the telecommunications and broadcasting sector and that the Commission is to consider the case, then we will fully communicate with the Commission. We believe that through correspondence we have set out clearly our direction and the approach of the two bodies in how to deal with the issues. Well, the question is getting more and more complex, but go on if you must pursue. Well, very simply, if both sides could answer me. I'll try, but if you can't answer the question, I will have to pursue it at other channels. Well, but why can't you come up with an agreed approach applicable to both? Because it seems that you're adopting two different approaches. Why can't you put your heads together and come up with an agreed approach? And are you concerned about the judicial challenge? Thank you. Now, I need to explain on this point that we jointly issued a set of guidelines on the interpretation and enforcement of the rules. There should not be any discrepancy in this regard. But of course, there are always problems, and we understand that there may be a gray area, and we may therefore need to discuss and come up with a better way to deal with the gray area. I accept that there could be a gray area, but under reasonable circumstances, we should be able to cope with the gray area and minimize discrepancies. Now, in the MOU, there are 2 points that are important to us. In the preamble and in the content, it is set out that our interpretation should be the same as far as practicable, and on enforcement, well, our enforcement should not hinder the work of the other party. So I believe under the room allowed, there will still be a lot of discussion and cooperation. Mr. Paul Chair, this is your first round. I should give you 5 minutes. Oh, it's okay. Just now, members asked about enforcement, leniency policy, and exemption. Well, the Department of Justice, as we all know, has a clear prosecution policy, and the Department of Justice has established good tradition. Well, of course, there have been controversy surrounding some cases, but as far as prosecution is concerned, they base the prosecution on, say, the basic law and the policy. And we have the DPP, we have the public prosecutor, and we also have PAOs, politically accountable officials, as checks and balances. Now, on my question, we have issues surrounding leniency policy, enforcement, etc. Well, Ms. Wu just now mentioned that we have a set of guidelines for enforcement. I want to know, for issues involving different sectors such as logistics and maritime, when you decide whether to grant leniency or not, whether to enforce or not, apart from the enforcement policy or enforcement guidelines, what criteria do you adopt, and what is the difference between you and the Department of Justice? If there is too much discretion on your part, how will the public gauge whether the Competition Commission is anti-competitive itself? Thank you for your question. We have leniency policy and enforcement policy with a view to set out our policies very clearly. We have the same function as a prosecution policy or prosecution function of the Department of Justice. We also have committees. They are politically accountable. Of course, everything is about political accountability. If an explanation is required, of course, we'll be happy to give one. As for our priority of work, I will ask Ms. Rapp to answer your question.
I just hopefully am understanding the question correctly, but I think you wanted to understand how the Department of Justice prosecution policy and our policy would work together. We are not a criminal prosecution agency. We'll be taking cases in the civil tribunal arrangement. And so we will have quite a bit of discretion in relation to what cases we take to the tribunal and how else we'll deal with people who we find have contravened the law. And our enforcement policy that we released last week outlines the range of factors that we'll take into account in deciding first whether to investigate a matter, and secondly, if we do find a contravention, what action we will take. And we have a range of remedies, including commitments and lesser warning letters and things like this that we can do instead of taking people to the tribunal. In relation to applications to the tribunal, the Commission's power is to seek a range of remedies, including penalties, but also disqualification orders, as the Chairman has mentioned, and a range of other orders. And the leniency policy says that in relation to the first person in, we would not seek a pecuniary penalty against that person or another order. However, we would seek a declaration by consent that they have contravened the ordinance. And so that's designed to still ensure that a finding of contravention is made against that party, but just that none of the civil penalties available to the tribunal would apply to that party.
Well, it would appear that the Commission has a very wide discretion, wouldn't it? And comparing with other, say, statutory bodies like the EOC, for instance, for which Chairman Wu should be very familiar with, time and again we have sort of to face criticisms from the public as to whether a particular case should or should not be referred to the tribunal for further actions. And without very transparent guidelines, without very transparent or even very illustrative guidelines or case laws, it would be very difficult for the public to judge whether the Commission is sort of exceeding its discretion or whether it is sort of enforcing the regulations fairly. So how would you comment on that?
Well, we have published quite a detailed enforcement policy that does the best we could in the circumstances where we haven't started enforcing the ordinance as yet. Our intention is to keep this under permanent review and update it from time to time. We understand that we'll be fully accountable for the decisions that we make about what types of cases we take. And the enforcement policy sets out that our underlying principles are to be professional, timely, proportionate, transparent and confidential. And so as we start our enforcement activities, we'll continue to engage with people to explain our priorities.
Right, thank you.
好，唔係最後一位。
Okay, let's continue. Mr. Jeffrey Lam, 3 minutes. Chairman, still on the subject of lenient policy, to pick up from my last question, informant will be protected. Well, very often we see prosecution witnesses being given some sort of immunity or leniency by the prosecutor or the enforcement agency, even if it's not expressly provided in the law. Now, you have expressly provided that informants will be given leniency treatment. We all understand this. In reality, there are always informants providing information, making complaint. Is it necessary to expressly provide for leniency treatment here? Now, just now, Chairman said she doesn't understand why the business sector doesn't agree. Now, we are not asking for a complete withdrawal of the policy. We are only suggesting that you should wait for the ordinance to come into full effect before you decide whether to introduce this policy. For SMEs, well, they may inadvertently be caught by the law. So why don't you look at the actual situation before you implement that policy? For transparency's sake, we have prepared the policy so as to allow everyone understand the scope, its effectiveness, etc. Not the lenient policy doesn't apply to each and every case. Yes, for informant there is leniency treatment for different enforcement agencies with different levels of leniency. Now, what is unique is that there may be a lot of informants. Now, the law allows us to waive the final pecuniary penalty, and we can only give leniency to the first marker, and it should be clearly spelled out in the law. And in the law, again, it says very clearly that as far as the Competition Commission's work is concerned, if there is no commitment from the offender, then the third party cannot pursue it. And because of that, in the leniency agreement, we do stipulate that in some circumstances a declaration is to be pursued with a court, that is for the court to make a decision. Now, this is the uniqueness of this policy. I think it should be clearly spelled out. It's better than keeping it vague.
Enough. Chairman, about informants, I think the business sector doesn't have to over-worry. Now, for the competition ordinance, for each type of offense, there is an exemption threshold, right? And if the turnover is smaller than a certain amount, or if your profit is smaller than a certain amount, then there is an exemption threshold. And also, Chairman, about informants, I don't think they should be labeled as betrayers. They do not really betray. Well, they are doing this because they want to get something back. Well, we are trying to maintain justice, and we need informants or whistleblowers. Now, if you see somebody committing a crime, and if that person is your friend, and you inform the police that this should not be regarded as betrayal. Okay, I shouldn't be debating with you. Please continue. So for each statutory offense, there is an exemption threshold. With such a threshold, I don't think the business sector or the General Chamber of Commerce should be so worried. So for SMEs, they won't get into trouble. Well, not all offenses have such an exemption. As for SMEs, under the first conduct rule and the second conduct rule, there are certain exemptions because they are smaller and their turnover is smaller. Later on, maybe Ms. Webb can give you some information on this. And we have another tool. So in the paper, we have talked about proportionality. So if it is a small offense, it's about something minor, then we would just issue a warning. And also there can be out-of-court settlements. So there are different tools for different level of severity. As for how to label the informants, well, we don't call them traitors.
There are thresholds for SMEs in both the first and second conduct rule, but for the first conduct rule, the threshold that applies does not apply when it's serious anti-competitive conduct. So the worst forms of conduct, such as price fixing and market sharing, bid rigging and output restriction, don't actually have any threshold, and all SMEs would have to comply with that. But as the Chair has stated, we'd be treating them very proportionately in the circumstances that we found such conduct.
Mr. Yu Swing is not here.
He's talking about the other version. It's the small tourist operator. They are small, but they're creating the most problems because they employ sort of the tour guide that forces people to buy things and then create that problem. So it's quite different from what you're talking about. So
what do you think of such conducts? Because they are not fixing the highest prices in order to make money. Actually, they are fixing a very low price, and then they force the tourists to buy things. So this is a very special situation. Have you thought about that? Chairman, you are right. For our law, what have we taken care of? We have looked at price control, tender rigging, etc. And as for other areas, maybe you have to look into other parts of the law. For example, you have to talk to the Consumer Council, or even maybe it's criminals. So you have to look for other channels. But if it's price fixing, etc., then of course it's under our jurisdiction. And there is an issue of the severity level. So we have proportionality. And also we talk to the trades. We would advise them to change some things. And if they ask us, if they want to give some information to the consumers, is that okay? We say it's okay, but of course we have to look at your actual practice. Any more questions? I think we still have a lot of questions, but maybe we should look at the actual operation after the full commencement, and then we can put more questions to you. And next time, I hope that the government will, or the Bureau will send representatives here, because we may have questions for the Bureau or even the Department of Justice. Chairman, I have a question. Give me 1 minute. I would like to ask a question on behalf of my constituency. Now, for accounting firms, when they recruit people, well, many accounting firms would offer the same pay level. Now, maybe they have talked, for example, they shouldn't be paying over $12,000 for the freshmen. So would that be regarded as price fixing? Well, I haven't thought about that. How about recruitment? If these firms have talked and then they come up with the same pay level.
Employment contract now we're talking about.
Have had some people bring this to our attention, and it is in a way price fixing because everyone is competing for the same good, in this case an accountant, and if they're fixing the price at which they're going to buy, the product, in which case the services of the accountant in particular, they could come under the ordinance. So we have been warning employee federations and things like this about the need to be careful when discussing employment salaries. It's fine to benchmark based on past practices, but going further than that and agreeing to the actual payments that you will make going forward could be problematic under the ordinance.
Okay, thank you.
Anna, how do you view this? Of course, we have the statutory minimum wage, but this is something else. Now, if perhaps it's not the accountants, but maybe the lawyers or the surveyors, maybe some firms would discuss and then they would come up with a minimum pay for a freshman. Have you thought about that? Does that fall under your jurisdiction? Chairman, we have talked to the trade associations. We have discussed a lot with them. Well, trade associations tend to collect a lot of data. They would make analysis, and then they would give such analysis to their members. So I have reminded them to pay attention to this. If they just provide data to their members for reference, then generally speaking, this is not against the law. So we have discussed with the trade associations about exchange of information. But if they agree on a certain wage level, for example, is between $2 to $4, let's fix it at $3, then it's like they have fixed a price. Now, there are a lot of problems. For example, companies would give pay increments to their staff every year. And the Employers Association will say that, oh, this year we're giving a 3% raise. And then the other companies will follow. So would that be regarded as a price fixing? Or even if we follow the civil service pay trend or pay increments, then we are also agreeing on the same price. I hope you can tell me that this is not your business. Otherwise, there will be a lot of problems because of this new piece of legislation. Well, maybe I can answer you this way. If you follow objective standards, then it is not a cartel, because you are just taking reference from some objective data. For cartel, it's you and I have to talk and then agree on something. So there is a difference between the two. Maybe Rose can supplement. The same that just following a price that's publicly available is not an issue. It's when people
it's just
agree.
A view that we think the salary
agreement.
should be increased 5%, but it wasn't colluded. Someone just made that statement, be it an association, the chamber, or whatever. Okay, glad to hear that. Okay, 暫時嗰段落。
Okay, I would like to thank you for coming. Our next meeting will be on the 15th of December, 4:30. We end early today because I think last night we all worked till very late.